My heart ached as my sister's venomous words sliced through the ambient noise of the private dining room. "Enjoy your pathetic life, Sloane," Blair announced. Her voice carried that specific pitch of condescension she had perfected over 3 decades of practice. She raised her crystal flute, making sure the dim restaurant light caught the massive, ostentatious diamonds resting heavily on her wrist. "Seriously, everyone, a toast to Sloane. 30 years old and still calculating risks for a living while hiding in that depressing little rented apartment." Cruel laughter erupted around the long, polished oak table. It wasn't just a polite chuckle. It was a deep, guttural sound of shared mockery. Uncle Thaddeus chuckled the loudest, his face turning a blotchy shade of red as he wiped a tear of mirth from his eye before taking a long, greedy sip of his $5,000 champagne. "Well," he boomed, his voice echoing off the mahogany-paneled walls of the exclusive room, "some people are just born to be the background characters so the rest of us can shine. Someone has to stay at the bottom of the ladder, right? It builds character." Burning tears threatened to betray me, stinging the corners of my eyes like tiny needles. The heat crawled up my neck, flushing my cheeks, making me feel exposed and incredibly vulnerable. I sat there in my off-the-rack beige dress, a simple garment I had bought on clearance specifically for this dinner because I knew they would judge whatever I wore anyway. The private VIP room at the Reserve, Chicago's most exclusive and notoriously expensive restaurant, suddenly felt like a beautifully decorated, suffocating cage. 40 of our family members and their so-called elite friends were sitting there, eating imported caviar and Wagyu beef, looking at me like I was a lost beggar who had somehow wandered in from the cold, unforgiving streets of the city. This night was supposed to be a joint celebration. It was my 30th birthday, a milestone that most people celebrate with joy and love. It was also the 5-year anniversary of Blair's company. But as always, it had rapidly morphed into the Blair Show. She was the CEO of an elite lifestyle concierge service. She claimed to throw parties for billionaires, fly on private jets, and wear luxury watches that cost more than most people's starter homes. She was the golden child, the shining star of our family tree, the woman everyone admired, envied, and desperately wanted to impress. I was just the senior actuary, the boring numbers girl, the scapegoat who was only invited so they had a pathetic baseline to measure their own fabulous, glittering lives against. I looked down at my pristine white porcelain plate, watching my own distorted reflection in the polished silver knife. My chest felt tight, gripped by a familiar, crushing sensation of being suffocated by their collective judgment. Every single person in this room believed I was a monumental failure. They thought I was barely scraping by, living paycheck to paycheck, a sad, single woman doing tedious paperwork while they lived out the ultimate American dream. They pitied me, but their pity was laced with a toxic dose of superiority. But as I watched Blair wave her manicured hand to summon a waiter, snapping her fingers as if he were a disobedient dog rather than a human being, an entirely different kind of heat began to replace my embarrassment. It was anger. Pure, unadulterated, ice-cold anger. The kind of anger that doesn't scream or throw things, but calculates. The kind of anger that builds up over years of silent endurance. Because what none of these laughing, mocking, arrogant people knew was that I was the one paying for this lavish dinner. I was the one indirectly paying for the vintage $5,000 champagne they were currently using to toast to my misery. I was the silent, hidden owner of the very commercial building this upscale restaurant was leased in. And far more importantly, I was the sole financial entity keeping my sister's so-called luxurious empire from collapsing into a massive, humiliating pile of dust. Blair smiled across the long table at me. It was a sickly sweet expression that did not even come close to reaching her cold, calculating eyes. "Don't look so down, Sloane. We all have our specific place in the world. Yours just happens to be modest. And there is nothing wrong with being incredibly ordinary. We need people to do the boring paperwork so people like me can create magic." I took a slow, deep breath, letting the oxygen fill my lungs to keep my hands from shaking. The irony hovering in the room was so heavy it felt tangible, like a thick fog. They were mercilessly mocking my poverty while unknowingly spending my vast fortune. They were humiliating me while literally standing on a floor I had built and owned. My fingers rested quietly in my lap, twitching with the overwhelming urge to pull out my phone right then and there. The temptation to drop the ultimate financial bomb was blinding. I wanted to see their smug faces fall. I wanted to watch the realization wash over them. But the actuary in me, the woman trained to assess risk and timing, knew better. You do not strike when you are emotional. You strike when the math is undeniably in your favor. As they continued to laugh, drinking the wine I was funding, eating the food I was subsidizing, I looked up at the extravagant crystal chandelier hanging above us. The light fractured through the glass, casting sharp, dagger-like shadows across the table. I wondered how many of them would still be laughing when the lights finally went out on their charade. What would you do if you held the literal financial lifeline to the very people who despised you and mocked your existence? Would you cut it without hesitation? Keep listening, because the night was just getting started and my patience had finally reached its expiration date. To truly understand why I was sitting there silently taking this horrific abuse, you have to understand the vast museum of scars I had been meticulously collecting for years. Family drama doesn't just explode overnight out of nowhere. It festers in the dark. It builds up steadily through 1,000 tiny, agonizing cuts until you are bleeding out on the living room floor, and they are only complaining about the stain you left on their expensive rug. The first major exhibit in my personal museum of pain was the reading of Our Parents' Will 7 years ago. Mom and Dad had always heavily favored Blair. She was the outgoing high school cheerleader, the local pageant winner, the vibrant girl who demanded and received the spotlight every single time she entered a room. I was the quiet reader, the introverted girl doing complex math puzzles in the corner, invisible and easily ignored. When they passed away unexpectedly in a tragic accident, the entire extended family gathered in the stuffy, wood-paneled lawyer's office, fully expecting Blair to inherit a massive, life-changing fortune. Instead, the lawyer cleared his throat and announced that they had left everything, every single penny and property, to various educational charities. Blair threw a massive, unhinged tantrum right there in the oversized leather chair. She screamed about how unfair it was, crying hysterically, accusing the lawyer of faking the documents. Uncle Thaddeus and Aunt Cordelia rushed to comfort her, rubbing her shoulders and glaring at me from across the room as if the charitable donation were somehow my malicious doing. But what they did not know, what absolutely no one in that room knew, was that my father had pulled me aside a year before he died. He had looked tired, his eyes heavy with a secret burden. He handed me a thick, sealed folder containing the details of a modest, hidden seed fund. He told me, "Sloan, your sister will burn through money simply to buy affection and status. She doesn't understand value. You know how to make money grow. Take this, build a secure life for yourself, and if they ever truly need a safety net, be there. But do not tell them. The money will destroy them." I honored his dying wish. I took that initial seed money and applied my intense risk assessment skills to the brutal world of commercial real estate. While the family mocked me relentlessly for working a boring insurance job with a supposedly meager salary, I was secretly buying up distressed commercial properties in up-and-coming neighborhoods, renovating them with brutal efficiency, and flipping the lucrative leases. I became a wealthy ghost in the financial world. The second glaring exhibit in my museum was the terrible snowstorm 3 years ago. I was driving my old, beat-up Honda, trying to save money on a car payment, when the alternator died on a deserted, unlit stretch of highway. It was freezing, the kind of brutal Chicago cold that bites through your winter coat and settles deep into your bones. I called Blair, sitting in the dark, shivering violently, begging her to come get me. She was only 10 miles away at her warm, cozy apartment. "Oh, Sloan, I really can't right now," she had sighed through the phone, the distinct sound of a nail file echoing in the background. "I'm in the middle of a crucial manicure for a massive charity gala tonight. Just call a tow truck. You have a credit card, right? Oh wait, with your tiny salary, maybe you don't. Figure it out, I have to go." She hung up. Just like that. I sat in that freezing, dead car for 4 agonizing hours waiting for a delayed tow truck, my teeth chattering, realizing then and there that shared blood meant nothing to her. But the centerpiece of my museum, the shining crown jewel of their endless hypocrisy, was the massive debt. 5 years ago, Blair's highly publicized lifestyle concierge business was secretly hemorrhaging cash. She was faking it till she made it, but she was spectacularly failing. She was facing imminent bankruptcy, devastating lawsuits from angry vendors, and potential jail time for fraudulent investor claims. Because I still carried the foolish, naive belief that family takes care of family, I stepped in to save her from ruin. I set up an anonymous shell company called Vanguard Holdings and quietly bought out all her toxic debt. I infused her failing business with massive amounts of fresh capital, restructuring her obligations so she could survive and keep her pride intact. I became her silent, invisible angel investor. Over the years, that initial bailout ballooned beyond control. With her reckless, unchecked spending, the extravagant parties she threw to maintain her image, the designer clothes she bought using the company account, the debt she owed my shell company had reached $10 million. $10 million. And it wasn't just her draining my resources. Aunt Cordelia and Uncle Thaddeus were living comfortably off a generous monthly trust fund that they firmly believed came from our late grandparents' estate. It did not. I was funding it. I was carving out a hefty chunk of my real estate profits every single month to keep my aunt and uncle living in their luxury gated golf course community, playing tennis and drinking martinis while looking down their noses at me. I was their silent lifeline. I was the very financial foundation they stood upon to look down on me. I kept desperately hoping that one day my silent generosity would matter. I kept hoping they would look at me and see a devoted sister, a loving niece, a human being worthy of basic dignity and respect. But tonight, listening to the clinking of expensive crystal glasses celebrating my supposed misery, the last naive, hopeful piece of my heart finally withered and turned to ash. I had literally bought a $10 million front row seat to my own humiliation. And they were about to show me exactly how cruel they could truly be. The mocking laughter eventually died down, replaced by the polite clatter of heavy silver forks against fine porcelain plates. Blair, practically glowing with the undivided attention of the room, tapped her silver knife against her crystal glass again, demanding silence. Anyway, enough about Sloane's little financial struggles. I have real, exciting news to share with everyone. She extended her left hand outward, wiggling her perfectly manicured fingers. A massive, gaudy diamond ring caught the chandelier light, practically blinding anyone looking directly at it. Preston finally popped the question. We are officially getting married in Aspen next winter. A loud chorus of gasps and exaggerated congratulations erupted from the table. Preston was a classic trust fund kid, a guy who spent his days pretending to day trade crypto and his nights drinking excessively expensive scotch at exclusive members-only clubs. He fit perfectly into Blair's carefully curated illusion of high society wealth. He looked the part, even if his own family's money was slowly drying up. "Oh, Blair, it's magnificent," Aunt Cordelia squealed, leaning dangerously over the table to inspect the massive rock. "It's exactly what you deserve. Only the best for our shining star." "Thanks, Auntie," Blair beamed, soaking in the adoration. Then, her eyes darted maliciously to me. "Sloane, you'll be there, of course. I can't have you as a bridesmaid, obviously. The dresses are custom imported silk, and frankly, we need a certain aesthetic for the magazine photos. You understand. But I'll definitely need someone to coordinate the caterers in the back and make sure the floral arrangements don't wilt in the snow. You're good with clipboards and boring details, right? It'll be a great experience for you." She wanted me to be her unpaid, hidden event staff. My own sister. She wanted me working in the cold behind the scenes of a wedding I would probably end up secretly financing. Before I could even formulate a calm response to that specific brand of towering toxicity, Uncle Thaddeus leaned his heavy arms heavily on the table, fixing his gaze on me. "Speaking of fixing details, Sloane, when are you going to move out of that rundown, depressing apartment of yours? It's getting embarrassing for us. Cordelia and I ran into the Wentworths at the country club the other day, and they asked what you were doing with your life. We had to make up a lie about you being on a spiritual sabbatical in Asia because telling them you still rent a tiny shoebox at 30 is just a terrible look for the family reputation. It's not a shoebox, I said quietly, forcing my voice to remain steady despite the raging, violent storm brewing inside my chest. It's a very practical space that suits my needs. It's a slum, Cordelia snapped, her face souring with visible disgust. She reached into her oversized designer handbag and pulled out a sleek, embossed envelope, sliding it forcefully across the table toward me. Look, we're doing a mandatory family contribution for Blair's lavish engagement party. Just a small, intimate gathering on a rented yacht next month. We need $5,000 from you by tomorrow. Consider it your mandatory gift to her since you won't be buying a bridesmaid dress or contributing to the aesthetic. I stared at the thick white envelope resting near my water glass. $5,000. She was boldly demanding $5,000 from a woman she genuinely believed made a mediocre administrative salary. If I were the struggling person they thought I was, that sum would be my entire life savings, wiped out for a yacht party I wasn't even truly welcome at. I don't think I can do that, I said, keeping my tone perfectly neutral, devoid of the panic they expected to see. Cordelia gasped loudly, clutching her expensive pearls in a gesture so dramatic it belonged in a daytime soap opera. Excuse me? Your sister is marrying into the prestigious Preston family. You are going to ruin this beautiful moment with your selfish, pathetic penny pinching? If you don't contribute your share, do not bother showing up to family Thanksgiving this year. I will personally cross your name off the guest list. The entire table grew uncomfortably silent. The clatter of silverware stopped. Everyone was watching me, waiting for me to cave under the pressure, to apologize profusely, to scramble for my limited credit cards just to stay in their good graces and maintain the illusion of family unity. Suddenly, a warm, rough hand gently nudged my elbow under the table. I looked to my left. My cousin Ezra was sitting next to me, watching the scene with quiet disgust. Ezra was the designated black sheep of the extended family. He was a skilled carpenter, a guy who worked hard with his hands, wore worn-out flannel shirts, and drove a truck. They looked down on him almost as much as they looked down on me because he refused to play their status games. He quietly pushed a small plate of expensive chocolate truffles toward me. Don't listen to them, Sloane, Ezra whispered, his voice barely audible over the soft ambient restaurant music playing in the background. You are worth 10 of her. Just breathe. Let them talk. I offered him a small, tight smile. Ezra was the only one in this massive room who possessed a shred of genuine humanity. He was also the only one who knew a tiny fraction of the truth about me, though even he did not know the full, staggering extent of my real estate empire. I looked back at Cordelia, leaving the envelope untouched, sitting like a white flag of surrender I refused to wave in the center of the table. I'll keep your threat in mind, Aunt Cordelia. Blair rolled her heavily made-up eyes dramatically. God, you are so deeply depressing, Sloane. Can you just for one night pretend to not be a total drag on everyone's mood? Right at that exact moment, cutting sharply through the heavy, suffocating tension of the room, Blair's phone began to ring. It was a loud, obnoxious pop song ringtone that felt entirely out of place in the elegant dining room. She looked down at the bright screen, her annoyed expression instantly morphing into a bright, entirely fake customer service smile. Oh, hold on everyone, quiet down. It's one of my top-tier billionaire clients, she announced proudly, waving the glowing phone around so everyone could clearly see the VIP caller ID. I simply have to take this. Duty calls when you run a massive empire. She pressed the green answer button, putting the phone to her ear with a grand flourish. Little did she know, that single phone call was the tiny spark that would ignite the massive powder keg she had been sitting on for 5 years. Marcus, darling. How are you this fabulous evening? Blair purled into the phone. Her voice dripped with artificial sweetness, a tone so sugary it could cause a toothache. She stood up gracefully, pacing near the head of the table to ensure every single person in the room was watching her play the role of an important, high-stakes businesswoman. But the voice on the other end of the line was loud. Shockingly loud. so loud that in the sudden quiet of the private dining room, several of us sitting nearby could clearly hear the static, tinny shouts of an older, furious man. "Don't you dare darling me, Blair," the voice barked, the anger vibrating through the small speaker. Blair's fake, practiced smile faltered instantly. She quickly fumbled to press the volume down button, her knuckles turning stark white as she gripped the slim phone. "Marcus, please, is there a problem with the charity gala preparations? We are right on schedule." "A problem? You could say that." Marcus's voice was still audible to those of us sitting close by, his rage uncontainable. "I just got off the phone with my primary vendors. Your corporate credit cards are bouncing. Every single one of them. The premium florist, the luxury caterer, the massive venue deposit. They all got forcefully declined, Blair. What kind of elite, top-tier concierge service operates with frozen credit cards?" The color drained from Blair's face so incredibly fast she looked like she had seen a terrifying ghost. Her perfectly applied contouring suddenly looked like cheap dirt smudged on a pale, frightened canvas. The entire table had gone dead silent. You could hear a pin drop on the thick carpet. Uncle Thaddeus lowered his champagne glass slowly, his bushy eyebrows knitting together in deep confusion. "Marcus, there must be a ridiculous banking error," Blair stammered, her voice shaking noticeably. The confident, untouchable CEO facade was crumbling into pieces in real time. "You know how these big, paranoid banks are with fraud protection these days. I'll have my senior finance team sort it out first thing in the morning." "You don't have a finance team, Blair. You have a single overworked receptionist," Marcus yelled, his voice echoing out of the earpiece. "If this massive mess isn't fixed in 24 hours, I am pulling my lucrative contract and suing you into oblivion for breach of agreement." "Fix it." The line went dead with a sharp click. Blair stood frozen, staring blankly at her dark phone screen. The heavy silence in the room was suffocating, thick with unspoken questions. "Blair, honey," Aunt Cordelia asked tentatively, her voice trembling slightly. "Is everything all right with the business?" "Everything is perfectly fine." Blair snapped violently, spinning around to face the table, her eyes wide, manic, and panicked. "Just a stupid, annoying bank glitch. So incredibly annoying. But it wasn't a glitch. I knew exactly what it was. My shell company's automated financial systems were specifically designed to flag accounts that missed 3 consecutive restructuring payments." Blair had been arrogantly ignoring the warning notices for months, assuming her anonymous angel investor would just keep bailing her out forever without consequence. The system had automatically, mercilessly suspended her massive credit lines. Suddenly, the heavy oak doors of our private room swung open. The restaurant's nervous maitre d' stepped inside, looking deeply apologetic, followed closely by a tall, distinguished older man wearing a tailored bespoke suit. "Excuse me, Miss Blair," the maitre d' murmured nervously. "Mr. Harrison insisted on coming in." It was Marcus Harrison himself, the angry man from the phone call. He happened to be dining in the main room of the restaurant and had recognized Blair's famously obnoxious laugh through the doors earlier. "Marcus," Blair gasped, her internal panic upgrading to pure, unadulterated terror. "What on earth are you doing in here?" "I wanted to look you directly in the eye when I said it," Marcus said coldly, stepping fully into the room. He did not care about the 40 wealthy guests staring at him in shock. "You are running a pathetic scam, Blair. Word is already spreading fast downtown. Your vendors are talking. You're broke. You are a fraud." Uncle Thaddeus stood up quickly, his face red with defensive anger, puffing out his chest. "Now see here, sir. You can't just barge in here and speak to my successful niece that way." Marcus ignored him entirely, glaring fiercely at Blair. "Fix it by tomorrow morning or you are completely finished in this city. Good luck." As Marcus turned sharply to leave, his cold eyes swept across the long, silent table. For a fraction of a second, his intense gaze locked directly onto mine. Marcus Harrison wasn't just a wealthy socialite. He was the powerful CEO of a tech firm that leased 3 massive floors in one of my premium commercial buildings in downtown Chicago. We had sat across from each other in tense boardroom meetings just last week to negotiate a 10-year lease extension worth millions. He recognized me instantly. His eyes widened slightly in profound shock, seeing his ruthless, brilliant landlord sitting quietly at a table while this hysterical woman was being publicly exposed as a fraud. I didn't blink. I simply gave him a nearly imperceptible shake of my head. Just a tiny, silent command: do not say a word. Marcus was a highly intelligent man. He understood power. He gave me a brief, respectful nod, turned on his heel, and walked out the door, leaving the private room in a state of absolute, undeniable chaos. Blair was hyperventilating, gripping the back of her chair to stay upright. Aunt Cordelia was frantically fanning her with an expensive leather-bound menu. Preston, the supposedly loving and supportive fiancé, was looking at Blair like she was a dangerous stranger, inching his chair slightly away from hers as if failure were a contagious disease. "Blair, what the hell is going on?" Thaddeus demanded loudly. "Are you actually broke?" Blair looked around the room like a trapped, cornered animal. Her eyes were wild, desperate for an escape route, desperate for someone else to blame for her own spectacular failure. And then, her panicked eyes landed directly on me. The eternal scapegoat. The easy, familiar target. "It's her fault," Blair suddenly shrieked, pointing a shaking, manicured finger right at my face. I blinked, genuinely caught off guard by the sheer, breathtaking absurdity of the accusation. "Excuse me?" "You." Blair stepped aggressively toward me, her face twisted with a vicious, totally irrational rage. "You bring this pathetic, poor energy everywhere you go. You sat there judging me all night with your cheap clothes and your miserable life. You ruin everything you touch. You are a walking curse, Sloane." Before anyone could stop her, she reached out, grabbed a half-full crystal glass of red wine from the table, and threw it right at my chest with all her might. The dark red liquid splashed violently across my collarbone, soaking instantly into the fabric of my pale dress, dripping down my neck like cold, dark blood. The entire room gasped in unison. Ezra jumped to his feet instantly, grabbing a cloth napkin. The cold sensation of the wine against my skin was a sharp, jarring contrast to the massive fire burning inside my mind. But the actuary in me did not panic. I did not cry. I did not scream back. I just sat there, breathing slowly, calculating the exact moment my sister permanently sealed her own fate. Ezra was frantically dabbing at my stained dress with the white cloth napkin, muttering angry curses under his breath. "I'm so sorry, Sloane. She's lost her mind. Let's get you out of here right now." I gently, firmly pushed Ezra's hand away. I stood up slowly, deliberately. The room was so incredibly quiet I could hear the faint, rhythmic ticking of the antique grandfather clock in the corner. Every single pair of eyes was glued to me. They were waiting for the breakdown. They were waiting for the tears, the desperate apologies, the familiar retreat of the beaten-down scapegoat shrinking away into the shadows to hide her shame. But the woman standing up was not the scapegoat anymore. The woman standing up was the landlord, the master investor, the invisible ghost who held their financial lives tightly in the palm of her hand. I picked up my own napkin and calmly wiped a single drop of red wine from my jawline. I looked directly at Blair. She was breathing heavily, her chest heaving, staring at me with a chaotic mixture of defiance and a deep, pathetic insecurity that she could no longer hide behind designer clothes. "Are you finished?" I asked. My voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the heavy silence like a surgical scalpel. It was cold, remarkably steady, and entirely devoid of any recognizable emotion. Blair recoiled slightly, visibly confused by my lack of tears and hysterics. You heard me. Get out. You don't belong here with us." "You're right," I said, my tone conversational, almost pleasant. "I don't belong here. I have spent 30 years trying desperately to fit into a space that was specifically designed to suffocate me. I thought that if I was quiet enough, helpful enough, patient enough, eventually you people would see me as actual family." "Oh, please, spare us the tiresome victim routine," Uncle Thaddeus scoffed, though his voice notably lacked its usual booming confidence. The humiliating scene with Marcus Harrison had deeply rattled him. I slowly turned my intense gaze to Thaddeus. "You really believe I'm the pathetic one here, Uncle Thaddeus?" You truly believe that a woman who works honestly for a living is somehow less valuable than a woman who throws violent tantrums when her credit cards are declined because she can't pay her bills. She runs an empire. Cordelia defended loudly, standing up to physically shield Blair. She runs a fragile house of cards, I corrected, my voice dropping an octave, carrying the weight of undisputed truth. And the wind is blowing very hard tonight, Aunt Cordelia. I looked back at my sister, the beloved golden child, the woman who had just physically assaulted me because she couldn't handle the crushing weight of her own failures. You asked me earlier to pretend not to be a drag for one night. I'm going to do one better, Blair. I am going to stop pretending entirely. Starting right now. I reached gracefully for my leather purse, slinging it over my shoulder with calm precision. What exactly does that mean? Blair demanded, her voice wavering, cracking slightly. The deep panic was rapidly returning to her eyes. She recognized a massive shift in the room's power dynamic, even if she didn't possess the mental capacity to understand the mechanics of it yet. It means you finally got your wish, I said, taking a deliberate step away from the table. You wanted someone to be at the bottom so you could delude yourself into feeling like you're at the top. But you forgot one fundamental rule of gravity, Blair. When the foundation crumbles, the people at the top fall the absolute hardest. I didn't wait for a frantic response. I turned my back on all 40 of them. I walked the long length of the private dining room, my heels clicking rhythmically and loudly against the hardwood floor. Each step felt infinitely lighter than the last. I was actively shedding 30 years of misplaced guilt, 30 years of desperate seeking for an approval they were incapable of giving. As I reached the heavy oak doors, I pushed them open firmly. The lively ambient noise of the main restaurant rushed in, instantly drowning out whatever Aunt Cordelia was starting to yell hysterically behind me. I walked confidently past the host stand, past the valet waiting outside, and stepped out into the crisp, cool Chicago night air. The city lights were bright, reflecting off the damp pavement. I took a deep, shuddering breath, inhaling the smell of exhaust and intoxicating freedom. My dress was ruined, stained, and sticky, but I had never felt cleaner in my entire life. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. I didn't call a taxi. I opened my contacts and scrolled past the family members who had just laughed at my humiliation. I stopped at a name saved simply as M. Let's sue Merrick. My thumb hovered over the glowing screen. This was the definitive point of no return. Once I made this specific call, there would be no fixing things. There would be no peaceful, fake family Thanksgiving dinners ever again. There would only be financial ruin. I thought about the $5,000 champagne they drank on my dime. I thought about the $10 million in debt I had absorbed for her. I thought about the cold wine soaking into my skin. I pressed call. The phone rang exactly twice before a deep, gravelly voice answered the line. It was 9:30 p.m. on a Friday night, but Merrick always answered when I called. He was a shark in a tailored suit, the kind of ruthless corporate lawyer who lived for the thrill of a hostile takeover and the destruction of bad investments. Sloan, Merrick said, his tone brisk and strictly professional. Tell me you're not calling this late to ask about the boring commercial zoning permits for the West Loop property. No, Merrick, I said, staring up at the towering, illuminated skyscrapers around me, feeling taller than all of them. I'm calling about the shell company. Vanguard Holdings. A brief, heavy pause hung on the line. Then, I heard the distinct sound of a leather chair squeaking as Merrick sat up straighter, giving me his full attention. I'm listening. For the past 6 months, Merrick and I had been quietly, meticulously preparing a massive contingency plan. I am a senior actuary. I assess risk for a living. And 6 months ago, looking at Blair's escalating spending habits, I had finally admitted to myself that my family was a catastrophic financial risk. We had legally restructured every single loan, every bailout fund, and every trust distribution with a very specific, lethal legal trigger. It was a call option clause. A powerful legal mechanism that allowed the lender, me, hiding safely behind the walls of Vanguard Holdings to demand full, immediate repayment of all outstanding debts if certain financial covenants were breached. Blair had breached those covenants months ago when she arrogantly stopped making her minimum restructuring payments. I had just been too soft, too bound by a false sense of familial duty to pull the trigger. Until tonight. Execute the call options, I said, the heavy words tasting like copper and long-awaited victory on my tongue. All of them. Liquidate everything. Merrick let out a low, impressed whistle. You're entirely sure about this? We are talking about aggressively calling in $10 million from your sister's fragile company. We are talking about permanently freezing the monthly trust distributions to the golf course accounts for your aunt and uncle. It's a financial nuclear strike, Sloan. By Monday morning, they won't be able to buy a cup of coffee without getting declined. Do it now, I ordered, my voice hard and unyielding. Don't wait for Monday. Initiate the digital freezes tonight. Let them wake up tomorrow to the wreckage of their own making. Understood, Merrick said, a hint of dark, professional satisfaction in his voice. I'll authorize the banking algorithms immediately. Sleep well, Sloan. You earned it. He hung up. I stood alone on the sidewalk, holding my phone, feeling the faint vibrations of the massive city beneath my feet. In some secure server room downtown, complex lines of code were rapidly executing my will. Bank accounts were being frozen. Massive credit lines were being slashed to zero. The false, luxurious reality my family had lived in for 5 years was being dismantled line by line, dollar by dollar. Before I raised my hand to hail a cab, my phone buzzed violently in my hand. It was a text message. Not from Blair or Thaddeus. It was from Ezra. Hey, the message read on the glowing screen. I just left the restaurant. It's a complete madhouse in there. Blair is screaming at waiters and crying. Are you okay? Where did you go? I smiled, a genuine, deeply tired smile that reached my eyes for the first time that night. I typed back swiftly, I'm fine, Ezra. In fact, I'm much better than fine. Do me a huge favor? Anything, he replied instantly, his loyalty unquestionable. Don't lend anyone a single dime this weekend. No matter what they say or how much they cry. A full minute passed. I imagined him standing by his truck, reading the text, piecing it together. Then Ezra's reply came through. Oh man. You finally pushed the big button, didn't you, boss lady? Ezra knew. He didn't know the exact dollar amounts, but he knew I was the one pulling the massive strings. When I bought my first dilapidated warehouse 5 years ago, I hired Ezra as the general contractor. I paid him triple his going rate and gave him a generous equity stake in the flip. He was the only family member who actually worked hard for his money, and in return, I had quietly made sure his custom carpentry business was the primary, highly paid contractor for all my commercial renovations. We were unlikely allies in a family of wealthy parasites. Get some popcorn, Ezra, I texted back, stepping toward the street. It's going to be a very wild weekend. I flagged down a black town car and gave the driver my address. Not the address of the depressing studio apartment I kept listed on public records to maintain the illusion. The real address. As the car sped down Michigan Avenue, I leaned my head against the cool glass of the window, watching the city blur past. The massive storm was coming for them. They had spent years ruthlessly mocking my umbrella, never realizing for a single second that I was the one controlling the weather. Thank you for watching this story so far. If you're enjoying this satisfying journey of karma, please take a second to hit subscribe and leave a comment below. What would you have done if your sister threw wine on you in front of 40 people? Let me know, and let's get back to the chaos of the next morning. The morning sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my bedroom, casting a warm, golden glow across the imported hardwood floors. It was exactly 8 o'clock on Saturday morning. For the first time in 30 years, I woke up without that familiar, heavy knot of anxiety sitting in my stomach. I stretched, feeling the soft Egyptian cotton sheets against my skin, and smiled at the breathtaking panoramic view of the Chicago skyline. I was no longer the family scapegoat. I was the architect of my own peace. I got out of bed, walked into my sprawling, marble-lined kitchen, and started brewing a pot of expensive, single-origin coffee. The quiet hum of the espresso machine was the only sound in the massive penthouse. It was peaceful, serene. Then, my phone started buzzing. It vibrated violently against the granite countertop, spinning in small circles. I walked over and looked at the screen. 57 missed calls. Over 100 unread text messages. The notifications were rolling and so fast they blurred together. Aunt Cordelia. Uncle Thaddeus. Preston. And, of course, a dozen calls from Blair. I poured my coffee slowly, letting the rich aroma fill the kitchen. I took a deliberate sip, savoring the taste, before finally picking up the device. Just as I unlocked it, Blair's name flashed across the screen again. I swiped right and answered, putting her on speakerphone while I leaned against the counter. "Good morning, Blair," I said, my voice as calm as a placid lake. "Sloan," she screamed. It was not a word. It was a high-pitched, hysterical shriek that lacked any of her usual polished elegance. She sounded like she was losing her mind. "What did you do? What did you do to us?" "I'm enjoying my morning coffee," I replied simply. "What seems to be the problem on your end?" "Don't play dumb with me," she shrieked, her voice cracking. I could hear heavy, panicked breathing in the background, along with the sound of drawers being slammed open and shut. "The bank. The trust fund. My company accounts. Everything is locked. The bank manager told me my investor pulled all the funding and executed a call option. My credit cards are declining at the grocery store, Sloan. I have $0 to my name." "That sounds like a massive administrative headache," I said, taking another sip of coffee. "Have you tried calling your anonymous angel investor?" "Oh, wait. You don't know who that is, do you?" "Sloan, I am not playing games," she sobbed. Real, genuine tears were finally falling. "This has to be some mistake. The bank said Vanguard Holdings issued the freeze. I don't even know who runs Vanguard Holdings. They won't tell me anything. And Uncle Thaddeus is having a meltdown. His country club membership auto renewal bounced this morning, and the dealership literally just towed his Mercedes away from his driveway because the lease payment was blocked." I smiled, looking out over the city. The automated systems Merrick set up were incredibly efficient. The towing company must have been dispatched the second the lease payment failed to clear at midnight. "Wow," I murmured, feigning mild surprise. "A towed Mercedes. That is embarrassing. Especially for a family that prides itself on image. Have you tried asking the Wentworths for a loan? Since you care so much about what they think." "Stop it," Blair wailed, the desperation in her voice reaching a fever pitch. "Why aren't you panicking? Why are you so calm? Our entire family is going under. We have nothing." "I am calm because my rent is paid, Blair," I said softly, the irony thick in my voice. "You told me to enjoy my pathetic life. That is exactly what I am doing. I am sitting here, enjoying it." "You did this," she breathed, the realization suddenly hitting her like a freight train. Her voice dropped to a terrified whisper. "Somehow, you did this. You reported us for fraud. You hacked the accounts. You ruined us because you were jealous." I let out a soft, genuine laugh. "Jealous? Of $10 million in hidden debt? I don't think so. But if you want to know the truth, if you want to understand exactly why your empire is burning to the ground today, you can come over and ask me in person." "Fine," she yelled, her anger flaring up again as a defense mechanism. "I am coming over right now. And I am bringing Uncle Thaddeus and Aunt Cordelia. We are going to march into your pathetic little slum, and we are going to get to the bottom of this. You are going to fix this, Sloan, or I swear to God." "I will text you the address," I interrupted smoothly. "Just make sure you give the concierge my name when you arrive. They have strict security." I hung up before she could respond, ending the call with a satisfying click. I typed out the address of my building, Sloan's Tower, arguably one of the most exclusive residential high-rises in downtown Chicago, and hit send. They thought they were coming to a cramped, depressing studio apartment to bully a frightened actuary into submission. They thought they could yell at me, intimidate me, and force me to undo whatever magical hack they assumed I had performed. They had no idea they were walking directly into the lion's den. I finished my coffee, walked into my massive walk-in closet, and selected a sharply tailored, expensive designer suit. If I was going to host an execution, I was going to dress the part. An hour later, the intercom in my kitchen chimed with a soft, elegant melody. I pressed the button to connect to the lobby. Miss Sloane, the deep, respectful voice of Henry, the head concierge, filled the room. You have 3 guests here. A Mr. and Mrs. Sterling and a Ms. Blair Sterling. They are quite agitated. They insist you live in a studio apartment in the basement. Should I call security? No, Henry, thank you, I replied smoothly. Send them up to the penthouse. Let them use the private elevator. Right away, ma'am. I stood in the center of my massive living room, waiting. The space was breathtaking, even to me. Floor-to-ceiling glass offered a 270-degree view of the sprawling city and the vast, blue expanse of Lake Michigan. The floors were custom imported Italian marble, gleaming under the modern, minimalist chandeliers. Original artwork hung on the walls, and the furniture was a collection of rare, mid-century modern pieces. It was a space designed for a billionaire, because, for all intents and purposes, that is exactly what I was. The soft chime of the private elevator echoed through the foyer. The polished steel doors slid silently open, revealing Blair, Uncle Thaddeus, and Aunt Cordelia. They stepped out of the elevator, ready to yell, ready to demand answers. But the words died in their throats the moment their expensive shoes hit the marble floor. I watched their faces as their brains desperately tried to process the visual information. Aunt Cordelia's mouth literally fell open, her jaw going slack. She dropped her designer handbag on the floor, the loud thud echoing in the vast space. Uncle Thaddeus, his face still red and blotchy from losing his beloved car, staggered backward slightly. He had to reach out and place his heavy hand against the cool marble wall just to steady himself. Blair looked like she was having a stroke. Her eyes darted wildly from the massive grand piano in the corner to the indoor glass fireplace and, finally, to me, standing calmly in the center of the room wearing a suit that cost more than her entire fake wedding dress. What? Thaddeus croaked, his vocal cords paralyzed by pure shock. Where are we? Whose apartment is this, Sloane? Are you house-sitting? I own the building, Uncle Thaddeus, I said, my voice carrying effortlessly across the large room. Welcome to Sloane's Tower. This is my home. The entire top floor. No, Blair whispered, violently shaking her head, backing away toward the elevator doors. No, this is a trick. You rent a shoebox. You are a senior actuary. You buy your clothes on sale. You are poor. I am careful, I corrected her, taking a few steps forward. There is a massive difference. You spend money to convince strangers you have value. I invest money to build actual power. You spent 5 years throwing elaborate parties on yachts. I spent 5 years buying commercial real estate, including the building you were so busy humiliating me in last night. Cordelia pressed her hands to her cheeks, her eyes welling with terrified tears. The trust fund. The money we get every month. The lawyer said it was from your grandfather's hidden offshore accounts. Grandpa died with $3,000 to his name, Aunt Cordelia, I said coldly. I funded your lifestyle. I paid for your golf club memberships. I paid for the roof over your head. Because my father asked me to be a safety net. I just didn't realize I was catching people who would spit in my face while I held them up. Then fix this. Blair suddenly screamed, stepping forward, pointing a trembling finger at me. If you have all this money, fix my company. The bank froze everything. Turn it back on, Sloane. You owe me. I am your sister. Before I could even respond to that staggering display of entitlement, the chime of the private elevator rang out a second time. The steel doors slid open again. Merrick stepped out. He looked immaculate in a sharp charcoal suit, carrying a thick, heavy leather briefcase. He surveyed the chaotic scene, his cold, calculating eyes sweeping over my terrified family members before landing on me. Right on time, Merrick, I said, gesturing to the sleek glass dining table in the corner of the room. Always a pleasure, Sloane, he replied, walking confidently to the table. He clicked the locks on his briefcase open with a sharp, decisive snap. He pulled out 3 massive stacks of paperwork, dropping them onto the glass surface. The heavy thud made Blair jump. Who is this? Thaddeus demanded, trying to regain a shred of his usual booming authority, though his voice shook pitifully. This is my corporate attorney, Mr. Merrick, I introduced him smoothly. He is here to explain exactly how gravity works. Merrick didn't smile. He looked at Blair as if she were a particularly unpleasant bug on his windshield. Ms. Sterling, I represent Vanguard Holdings, the anonymous angel investment firm that has been single-handedly keeping your fraudulent concierge business out of bankruptcy court for the past 5 years. Blair's face went from pale to a sickly shade of gray. The pieces were finally clicking together in her mind. The anonymous investor. The sudden freeze. The sister she had mocked for being poor. I have brought the receipts, Merrick stated, tapping the thickest stack of files. Every loan agreement, every bailout transfer, and every contract you blindly signed without reading. And it all leads to one undeniable fact. Merrick looked directly into Blair's terrified eyes. You owe my client $10 million. Payable immediately. The number hung in the air like a physical weight, crushing the oxygen out of the room. $10 million. Uncle Thaddeus clutched his chest, sinking slowly into one of my imported leather dining chairs without asking for permission. Aunt Cordelia began to weep openly, the sound echoing miserably against the marble floors. Blair, however, went into sheer denial. 10 million. She laughed, a high, frantic sound that bordered on hysteria. That is insane. That is a lie. I never borrowed $10 million from her. I had an angel investor. A firm. Not Sloan. Merrick did not blink. He simply opened the top folder and slid a crisp, legally binding document across the glass table. Exhibit A, Ms. Sterling. The initial bailout agreement from 5 years ago. Vanguard Holdings absorbed $2 million of your toxic vendor debt to prevent criminal charges against you. Please direct your attention to the signature line. Blair stared at the paper. It was her signature. A bold, flourishing loop of ink that she used on all her important documents. You sign this electronically via your lawyer, Merrick continued, his voice cold and rhythmic, striking like a judge's gavel. Vanguard Holdings is a fully owned subsidiary of Sloan Enterprises. My client is the sole proprietor. But they never told me it was her. Blair stammered, pointing a shaking finger at me. That is fraud. You tricked me. You lied to me to get control of my life. It is called a blind trust investment, Merrick corrected her sharply. It is perfectly legal. You were desperate, Ms. Sterling. You were facing potential jail time for defrauding investors. You didn't care where the money came from, only that it saved your reputation. You eagerly signed the contracts, giving Vanguard Holdings full auditing rights and a call option on your debt. He pulled out another stack of papers, slamming it down on top of the first. Exhibit B. Your corporate credit card statements for the last 36 months. You used investor capital, provided by my client, to purchase designer clothing, fund luxury vacations to St. Bart's, and pay the lease on a sports car for your fiancé, Preston. That is a direct violation of the operating covenant you signed. Blair covered her ears with her hands, shaking her head. Stop it. Stop talking. Because you violated the covenant and subsequently missed 3 consecutive restructuring payments, Merrick pressed on relentlessly. My client was legally entitled to execute the call option. Your debt is no longer deferred. It is due today. Since your company possesses virtually zero liquid assets, we have initiated full asset seizure. Your business accounts, your inventory, your intellectual property. All of it belongs to Sloan. The room was painfully quiet, save for Cordelia's soft sobbing. The illusion was entirely shattered. The Golden Child was not a brilliant CEO. She was a massive liability, a fraud kept afloat entirely by the grace of the sister she despised. Aunt Cordelia suddenly stood up from the chair, rushing toward me. She bypassed Blair entirely and threw herself to her knees right in front of me on the marble floor. Sloan, please, she begged, tears ruining her expensive makeup, leaving dark streaks down her face. She reached out and grabbed the hem of my suit jacket. Please, I am so sorry. We were wrong. We were blind. Do not do this. Do not take the trust fund away. Thaddeus is too old to work. We will lose the house on the golf course. We will be ruined. We are your family. I looked down at the woman kneeling at my feet. This was the same woman who, less than 12 hours ago, had threatened to banish me from the family if I didn't hand over $5,000 for a yacht party. I gently but firmly pulled my jacket out of her grasp and took a step back. I looked from Cordelia to Thaddeus and finally to Blair, who was staring at the floor in defeated silence. "Get up, Aunt Cordelia," I said. My voice wasn't angry anymore. It was just profoundly empty. "Do not debase yourself. It won't change the math. How can you be so cold?" Thaddeus rasped, looking at me like I was a monster. "We are blood. We made mistakes, yes, but to leave us with nothing? To destroy your own sister? What kind of person does that?" I looked at him, feeling a strange sense of closure wash over me. The final piece of the puzzle locking into place. "I am exactly the kind of person you trained me to be, Uncle Thaddeus," I replied smoothly. "Do you remember what you said to me last night while drinking my champagne in my building?" Thaddeus swallowed hard, unable to meet my eyes. "You said that some people are just born to be background characters," I reminded him, my words hanging heavy in the silent penthouse. "You said someone has to stay at the bottom of the ladder so the rest of you can shine. You said it builds character." I turned my gaze to Blair. "Enjoy your character building, Blair. I sincerely hope it makes you a better person." "You are a monster," Blair whispered venomously, her true nature breaking through the fear. "You planned this. You wanted to see me suffer." "I wanted to see you succeed," I corrected her quietly. "I gave you $10 million and 5 years to figure it out. You chose to use it to mock me. The only monster in this room is the one staring back at you in the mirror." The tension in the penthouse was suffocating. I had delivered the final blow, and there was nothing left to say. The files were on the table. The truth was out in the open. The massive debt was unpayable. Just as Uncle Thaddeus was attempting to gather enough dignity to stand up, the private elevator chimed for a third time. The doors opened and Preston stepped out. He was holding his phone in his hand, his face pale, his eyes darting frantically around the luxurious space before landing on Blair. "Preston!" Blair cried out, a glimmer of desperate hope returning to her eyes. She ran toward him, throwing her arms around his neck. "Thank God you're here. We need to hire lawyers. Sloan is trying to steal my company. She tricked me." Preston did not hug her back. In fact, he physically peeled her arms off his neck and took a large step backward, putting distance between them as if she were radioactive. "Preston?" Blair asked, her voice trembling. "What's wrong?" Preston held up his phone. The screen was displaying a popular Chicago financial gossip blog. "I just got a Google alert," Preston said, his voice hard and utterly devoid of the affection he had shown her last night. "An article just dropped 10 minutes ago. It says Elite Lifestyle Concierge is insolvent. Vendors are leaking emails about bounce checks. The article says the CEO owes $10 million to an anonymous holding company and is facing asset seizure." Blair gasped, covering her mouth. The media reveal. Merrick must have leaked the court filings the moment the freeze went into effect. "It's a misunderstanding," Blair pleaded, reaching for him again. "We can fix it. We are getting married. We will figure it out together." "We?" Preston scoffed, a cruel smirk twisting his lips. He looked at Blair with the exact same expression she had used to look at me for 30 years. Pure disdain. "There is no we, Blair. My parents just called me. They saw the news. They threatened to cut me out of the family trust if I tie myself to a $10 million sinking ship. You lied to me. You told me you were rich." "I am rich," Blair cried frantically. "Or I was. We can start over." "I don't do poor, Blair," Preston said coldly. He reached into his pocket, pulled out the massive diamond ring, and tossed it onto the marble floor. It bounced with a sharp clink, rolling away to rest near Merrick's expensive leather shoes. "The wedding is off. Don't ever call me again." Without another word, Preston turned around, pressed the elevator button, and stood there in silence until the doors opened and swallowed him whole. Blair collapsed onto the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. The golden child, the beloved CEO, the future bride, stripped of every single title she had built her identity upon, all within the span of 12 hours. Aunt Cordelia knelt beside her, crying with her. Uncle Thaddeus just stared blankly at the breathtaking view of the lake, realizing his life of leisure was permanently over. I watched them for a long moment. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel a wicked sense of triumph. I just felt a profound, heavy exhaustion. Carrying their weight for 5 years had drained me. "Merrick," I said softly, breaking the sound of their weeping. "Please escort these people out of my home. If they refuse to leave in 5 minutes, call the building security and have them physically removed." With pleasure, Merrick nodded, stepping forward. "Sloan, please," Thaddeus croaked one last time, looking at me with defeated eyes. "Where will we go?" "You will go find a job, Uncle Thaddeus," I replied firmly. "You will go find a modest apartment you can actually afford. You will learn to budget, and you will learn to survive without relying on the generosity of someone you view as pathetic." I turned my back on them. I walked away from the crying, the begging, and the shattered illusions. I walked down the long hallway toward my master bedroom, shutting the heavy oak door firmly behind me. Through the thick wood, I could hear Merrick's stern voice directing them toward the elevator. I heard the muffled sounds of footsteps shuffling across the marble. And finally, I heard the soft chime of the elevator doors closing. They were gone. They had walked out of my luxurious sanctuary, their shoulders slumped, stripped of everything they hadn't earned. The people who had ruthlessly mocked my poverty were now stepping out onto the Chicago streets without a single dollar to their names. The silence that followed was beautiful. The massive fallout from that weekend was swift, brutal, and entirely predictable. Within a month, Vanguard Holdings officially liquidated Elite Lifestyle Concierge. The assets barely covered a fraction of the debt, but I didn't care. The point was never to get the money back. The point was to stop the bleeding. Word spread through our social circles like wildfire. The Wentworths, the country club elites, everyone who had eagerly listened to Aunt Cordelia brag about her wealthy nieces, suddenly found themselves witnessing a spectacular financial collapse. Uncle Thaddeus and Aunt Cordelia were forced to sell their golf course home at a massive loss just to cover their immediate personal debts. They moved into a cramped, damp studio apartment on the outskirts of the city. It was the exact type of place they had spent years loudly mocking me for supposedly living in. The irony was poetic. As for Blair, reality hit her harder than anyone else. Without Preston, without her fake empire, and without my silent funding, she was exposed to the harsh, unforgiving world of the working class. She had zero marketable skills beyond throwing parties she couldn't afford. The last I heard through the family grapevine, she had taken a job as a frontline cashier at an upscale grocery store downtown. She spent her days scanning organic vegetables for the very same wealthy socialites she used to invite to her charity galas. I imagined it was a very bitter pill to swallow. I didn't reach out to them. They didn't reach out to me. The silence between us was a vast, unbridgeable canyon. Instead, I focused on the people who actually mattered. 6 months after the confrontation, I hosted another dinner at the Reserve, the exact same restaurant where the disaster had occurred. But this time, I didn't rent the private room, and I didn't wear a clearance rack dress. I sat in the main dining area, wearing a stunning designer gown, sharing a bottle of premium wine with my cousin Ezra. Ezra had taken the capital I provided from our real estate flips and expanded his carpentry business into a massive, highly successful custom contracting firm. He was thriving, building a life with his own 2 hands. "I have to admit," Ezra said, swirling the wine in his glass, "I drove past Blair's grocery store last week. I saw her bagging groceries. Part of me felt bad for her." "Empathy is a good trait, Ezra," I replied, cutting into my steak. "It means you're human. But feeling bad for a snake doesn't mean you should invite it back into your house." "Fair enough," he chuckled, raising his glass to clink against mine. "To the boss lady. The only real family I've got." "To real family," I echoed. When I returned to my penthouse that night, Henry the concierge handed me a small, slightly crumpled white envelope. It had no return address, just my name written in familiar, looping handwriting. Blair. I took the elevator up to my floor, my heart beating slightly faster. I walked into the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and stared at the envelope on the marble counter. Part of me wanted to shred it without opening it. Part of me feared it was another demand for money, another toxic accusation. But curiosity and a lingering thread of sisterly connection won out. I carefully tore the flap open and pulled out a single sheet of lined notebook paper. Sloan, it read. I am not writing to ask for money. I know that bridge is burned to ashes. I am not writing to make excuses, because I know you won't accept them. I am writing because scanning barcodes for 8 hours a day gives you a lot of time to think. And I realized something. I realized why I hated you so much. It wasn't because you were boring or because you wore cheap clothes. I hated you because even when I had the expensive clothes, the rich fiancé, and the shiny company, I felt entirely empty inside. I was constantly terrified that everyone would find out I was a fraud. I lived in constant fear of failure. But you were fearless. You were quiet, but you were solid. You never needed anyone's approval to exist. You built an empire in the shadows while I built a sandcastle in the spotlight. I was deeply, cripplingly jealous of your mind, Sloan. I bullied you because pushing you down was the only way I could convince myself I was standing up. I am sorry. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't expect you to reply. I just wanted you to know that you won. You were always the better one. Enjoy your beautiful life. Blair. I stood in the quiet kitchen, reading the letter 3 times over. It was the first time in 30 years that my sister had ever spoken a single word of genuine truth. There was no arrogance in the ink. There was only the raw, painful reality of a broken person who had finally been forced to look in the mirror. A single tear slipped down my cheek, dropping onto the paper and blurring the ink on her signature. It wasn't a tear of sadness for the sister I had lost. It was a tear of mourning for the sister I never truly had. I didn't reply to Blair's letter. I took the piece of notebook paper, folded it neatly, and placed it inside a small wooden box in my desk drawer, right next to the original copy of my parents' will. Perhaps one day, years from now, when she has truly proven that she has changed her core values, I might reach out. I might invite her for a cup of coffee. But not today. And probably not tomorrow. Because what this entire excruciating journey taught me is that forgiveness and access are two completely entirely different concepts. You can forgive someone for the terrible things they did to you because carrying the heavy weight of anger will only poison your own soul. I forgive Blair for her blinding jealousy. I forgive my aunt and uncle for their grotesque greed. I release the anger because I no longer need it as a shield. But forgiveness does not automatically mean you grant them access to your life again. You do not have to invite the arsonist back into the beautiful house they tried to burn down, just because they finally admitted that playing with fire was a bad idea. I had spent my entire life believing a dangerous lie. I believed that family was defined solely by shared DNA. I believed that because we shared the same parents or the same bloodline, I was obligated to endure their disrespect, fund their extravagant mistakes, and sacrifice my own mental health to keep the peace. I was wrong. Family isn't DNA. Family is respect. Family is the people who stand by you when you have nothing to offer them but your presence. Family is Ezra pushing a plate of chocolate truffles toward me while the rest of the room tried to tear me apart. Today, my life is exactly what I always wanted it to be. It is quiet. It is peaceful. My real estate portfolio continues to grow, managed efficiently by Merrick and built solidly by Ezra's contracting firm. I still work as a senior actuary, not because I need the salary, but because I genuinely love the complex mathematics of risk. It keeps my mind sharp. I still live in my massive penthouse in the sky, looking down at the city lights, knowing that I earned every single square inch of it through patience, strategy, and unyielding resilience. Sometimes, when I walk through the upscale grocery store downtown to buy fresh produce, I intentionally avoid the checkout lane where Blair is working. Not out of malice or a desire to humiliate her further. I avoid her out of mercy. She needs to walk her own difficult path now, without my shadow looming over her. She needs to learn how to stand on her own 2 feet without using my shoulders as a stepping stone. The scars from 30 years of emotional abuse don't magically vanish overnight just because your bank account has a lot of zeros in it. I still have days where the echoes of their cruel laughter ring in my ears. I still have moments where I second-guess my own worth. But then I look around at the fortress I built, and I remember the immense power of walking away. I took back my narrative. I rewrote the ending to the story they had planned for me. The pathetic sister who still rents turned out to be the landlord who evicted them from their own delusions. But lately, I have found myself staring at that wooden box in my desk drawer. The letter inside it feels heavy. Some of my friends, the few who know the full, unvarnished truth of what happened that night, have told me that I was too harsh. They argue that seeing Blair broken, working a minimum wage job, is proof enough that the lesson has been learned. They tell me that family is complicated, and that extending an olive branch now that she has been humbled would be the ultimate act of grace. They say I should give her a second chance. But another part of me, the analytical actuary who calculates historical risk, strongly disagrees. That part of me remembers the cold sensation of red wine soaking into my skin. That part of me remembers the vicious look in her eyes when she told me I was a walking curse. Giving a toxic person a second chance sometimes just gives them a better opportunity to find a sharper knife. So, I turn to you. You have heard the entire story. You have seen the Museum of Scars, the stolen $10 million, the horrific humiliation at the dinner table, and the ultimate financial destruction of their fake empire. You know about the letter and the apparent remorse. I want you to act as the jury today. Put yourself in my shoes. Look at the history of pain and the reality of the present. Am I wrong for keeping the door firmly locked? Is my refusal to reconcile an act of healthy self-preservation, or is it just a lingering form of cruel revenge? If it were your sister, your family, your $10 million, what would you do? Should I leave Blair to her consequences permanently, or should I eventually open the envelope and offer her a way back into my life? Tell me your verdict in the comments below. I read every single one of them. If you found this story of karma and boundary satisfying, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story. Share this with someone who needs a reminder that they don't have to tolerate toxic family members. Thank you for listening, and remember, always protect your peace.